You learn the most about winter camping if you are really out in nature. Here come our key takeaways. Hey guys, welcome to the High Ground. My name is Fabio, and this is the second part or the continuation of a previous video that I made about the winter bivouac. Now, in the first video, it was more about storytelling, about showing you how we actually slept outdoors in a snowstorm in one of the coldest spots of Switzerland. In this video, we're talking more about the gear and the takeaways we have from this experience. To set this in advance, you might hear it by my voice. I have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize if there are some cuts because I had to cough or something like that. But I don't want you to hear my sneezing, and I hope you can cope with my voice today. Now, maybe a little bit on my and our background, the background of the group that has gathered this experience I'm giving to you right now. So, the group is all former military or even active duty military still. You might see if you watch the other video, I'll post the link in the description below. If you watch that other video, that a lot of the faces are blurred because it's policy if they're still on active duty here in different European countries. And I myself, additionally, I was in the Swiss mountain guide course. I spent roughly 200 days per year in the mountains. That entailed a lot of sleeping in the mountains, although to be honest, more in the summer time. During the winter time, we usually have bivouac boxes where you basically have a fixed established shelter and you just bring your heat source and something to eat and drink. But still, I spent a considerable time in the last years out in nature, and this is also where I gather a lot of the experience that I present to you. Now I will structure this video in the classic 4 topics that you need for survival in the outdoors. We will talk about fire, we will talk about shelter, and then water and food. Now, since I will show you some gear, shelter will also include some clothes and clothing. And fire, of course, also fire starters. Water will not only entail how to get water, but also how to carry water in the best possible way. So we will be a little bit broader, but still work with those 4 categories. Now let's start with the fire section. So the one thing that was surprising for us, we only built a small to mid-sized fire, but we still needed a lot of dry wood. We actually had a little pocket saw, which is very recommendable, and we fell some trees, some dead trees that had this diameter and 8 meter height, 20 feet meter height. So quite big trees. And during the night, I mean, it was not hardwood. It was more softer wood, evergreens. But during the night, we almost burned all of the wood we had gathered. So keep that in mind. Fire will need more wood than you originally expect. Then I already mentioned it. I didn't buy one yet, but I will buy one, and I already know which one. So I'll post you my future saw also down in the description. A saw, a folding saw, is really worth its weight in gold. I brought the Swiss Army knives, a bigger one like this size, which also had a saw to fold out, but really a pocket saw that was 270 millimeters. So that's roughly, that's 12-inch, something like that. 12-inch long pocket saw with a 12-inch blade. That was really, really helpful. So I would always now, for future purposes, bring such a saw with me. Then let's come to fire starters. I brought different fire starters, and a few things surprised me. So I brought lighters, I brought storm matches, and I brought a ferro rod. And with the lighters, I wanted to ignite my stove, which we will look at a little bit later. And I was always of the impression, hey, if I have a lighter and I can use it, it will be my first choice. But what I noticed with this fully manual lighters that actually have the little um, the little stone in there, right? And you have to turn it. So as soon as I had somewhat cold hands, I didn't really have the fine motor skills to use that lighter anymore. So I was trying to do it, but I couldn't actually get it to burn. So for future purposes, even if I would have the fire sleeve from Exotech, which is really recommendable, I would bring more a semi-auto lighter, which I can just push down and it will burn. Um, I was not able to ignite storm matches because my hands were so cold, but something that worked was more or less the not so fine motor skill with just using the ferro rod. That went very well. And yeah, so I would always recommend to bring a ferro rod, especially for igniting stove and stuff. It seems to be the best solution that I found yet. It works when it is wet. So yeah, ferro rods are really an awesome thing. One of our guys brought a small chair with him, a small camping chair that you can fold together, and not a big one with rest for your back or something like that, but really only a small one with 3 legs. And that was incredibly useful to put stuff on. We had it next to the fire, we put the stove onto it, and that's something that I will definitely do the next time. I will make sure that next to the fire, I have something to sit on, but also something to put things on, right? Maybe something that I want to dry or just something that I want to store there while I'm doing something else. So have something next to your fire where you could put things on and where you can sit on. For the second section, the shelter. First of all, if you really rely on building your bivy yourself and you don't have all day to really build it out, but you're more or less in a hurry situation, so we said we had 2 hours, we gave ourselves 2 hours, then you will not be very comfortable. So it will just not be a very good night. But you can make it at least bearable. The next thing that we noticed is that teams that utilized already available natural structures, for example, the roots of a fallen tree, had an easier time building a shelter than people or teams that were only relying on their tarps and were basically just tensioning their tarps, and that's it. We used, as I said, the roots of a tree. We sealed them up with branches from trees and then with snow on top of that, and just sealed the front side, the entry, with a tarp. And that was actually quite cozy. It was okay. And that leads us to the next thing, tarps. Now, tarps are quite cool, but they are not as good as, well, they are made up to be if you really watch what is going on YouTube. This is one from Arctis. It's 1.5 meters, so 5 feet by 3 meters, 10 feet roughly. And it also functions as a poncho, and it worked fairly well. So it is okay, but we had one guy who actually brought a tent, and he brought this one, and it was so much warmer in there. So if you plan on staying outside in the snow, especially for longer, you might want to bring a tent. This is the Saleva Light Track 2 Camo. So it's a camouflaged tent. Um, and a lot of our guys, after the experience on this weekend, bought this tent because it has some really awesome properties. So first of all, it's a more or less military grade tent. So all the outer shells and all the fabric are super thick. They are much stronger than the usual trekking tent, but of course it comes in on a little bit of a higher weight. What this tent also has, it has its poles outside of the actual tent structure. So you put the poles in and then you just clip the tent to the poles. And that leads to, or that avoids an issue that actually someone had with his bivy bag that also had a pole in there. Because the poles are outside, you don't have condensation on them, on the metal poles, that freezes up during the night. And the person with the bivy bag actually had the issue that he couldn't unstick the little parts of the poles because they were frozen together. So you can avoid that with an actual tent poles that are outside of the tent. And of course, you don't need to pitch that tent down, so it holds it up itself. It's a geodetic structure, and that's also something you want to have in snow, because what we saw, you can work fairly reasonably with sticks that you hammer into the snow, but it is not as good as an actual tent peg on another type of ground. The next thing I want to talk about are mats. Now, I have this combination. This is an inflatable mat from Expat, which is actually a Swiss company. And this is the Thermarest, which is very common within mountaineering circles. Now, this one worked fairly well, and I always use them together. I use this one as a base insulation and put that one on top. This one protects the inflatable mat, and you actually need that, especially if you put branches or something like that below your sleeping area, which makes it more comfortable. Now, we also had some people who only brought inflatable mats. And out of the 7 people that we were, 2 of them had malfunctions with their inflatable mat. May it be due to the low temperature or to old age of the mats, but both of them had pretty shitty nights. One of them actually left his bivy and just slept on the ground, on the dry ground next to the campfire. So that's really bad if your mat gives up. So I would not rely only on an inflatable mat. A particular issue I have with this mat, and I didn't have that before because generally in the mountains I have pretty flat ground. Now, since we slept below a fallen tree, the ground was slightly angled downwards, and my sleeping bag was actually sliding down that mat. This mat is super slippery if you put the sleeping bag on top of it. So I wonder if they don't have any better outside material that gives a little bit more friction to the sleeping bag. But yeah, maybe one of you has a solution for that. If you have it, please post it in the comments because I'm really interested in that one. Now let's get to the clothes. And for you to understand which gear I was actually wearing, I had base layers of merino, which works fine. I had the Arc'teryx Petrol AR pants, so that's the thick soft shell pant from their Leaf series. Um, I had the Arc'teryx Petrol hoodie. It's the insulation jacket from their Leaf series. On top of that, when needed, I had the Patagonia Fitzroy down jacket, and I had a smog, the combat smog from Arctis, on top of everything. Now, how did that work out? Well, I know the Arc'teryx softshell pants quite well, and these are very good pants. So I climbed really hard stuff in the mountains with similar, just made for mountaineering, softshell pants from Arc'teryx. They're super water resistant. I was also this time kneeling in the snow, no problem at all. In one thing, I felt that hardshell pants would have been superior, and this is wind protection. Since you usually don't have as much layers on your leg, but you might have boxer shorts, long underpants, and then the pants on top, right? I really didn't have a lot of insulation from heavy wind. And that was something where I felt a little bit of cold creeping in. So that's something to consider. You might want to bring at least an outer layer that protects you from wind. Now, for the upper side, the combination worked really well. And one thing I want to point out is this. It's a smock. Now, a smock is a military jacket which basically does not do a lot, but it protects anything you wear under it, and it has a lot of pockets. And these pockets are huge. I mean, I can put within both of them, I can put, I think, 10 AR magazines. So, and then I still have the ones up on the chest, right? This one turned out to be awesome. First of all, as I explained in my video about down versus synthetic, if you want to check that out, the insulation capacities of down are superior to the ones of synthetic fibers. And actually, this smog kept my down from getting wet, even though we had a snowstorm, it was constantly snowing, and we were working in the snow. But this one kept me fairly dry. Now, it is not a hard shell jacket. It is still a soft shell jacket that is just treated with DWR. Um, but it is a very good outer layer. And whenever I got too hot, I took off my down jacket and put the smog back on. And this one proved very, very good. It also held off a little bit of the wind, although I can't tell you if I would have felt that without the smog, because I was wearing an Arc'teryx synthetic insulation jacket, and on top of that, the Patagonia Fitzroy down parka. So not sure if that was really the smog, but it for sure helped. Yeah, so that's really a recommendation. You can wear down, especially in very cold temperatures, but make sure that you have something that protects it from humidity from outside. Sweating was actually not that big of a problem, although I just try to pace myself, especially when felling trees and stuff. So yeah, you just have to be a little bit careful there. But a smog is definitely a recommendation I want to give you. Another things are gloves. So just from my experience in the mountains, I always bring 3 pair of gloves. Just ordinary thin gloves for anything that is physically exhausting. Then a pair of thicker gloves that keeps my hands warm but still has fingers. And then another pair of mittens. One of the guys only brought 1 pair. They got wet, and I was then even able to give him one of my pairs. So I gave him my mittens for him to stay warm. If he would only have had 1 pair of gloves, I think the night would have ended badly for him. So really with the gloves, because that's something that constantly touches snow and you're working with, bring a backup there, and not only bring 2 pairs, but really bring 3 pairs. There a tip, just from my experience with mountaineering. I always put my mittens into my down jacket, because that's what I get out if I'm really cold, and then there is a high probability that I also have cold hands, so I have my gloves, my mittens always on the inside of my down jacket. And the last thing that we found to be very useful, your shoes will of course have snow on them. Even if you beat them against each other, there will still be some snow and ice on them. And we put them into trash bags overnight and had them with us in our shelter. So we didn't put them in our sleeping bags. We didn't do that because we didn't want to have any wetness in the sleeping bag. But the trash bag really made sure that no snow or dirt is falling into the shoes, but also that if the snow melts, it doesn't make your shelter wet. Now for the third topic, water. Now, we were only out for a day and a night and another half day, so we were able to bring enough water. In that regard, no one of us really drank enough. We all had plenty of water, but you still don't feel like drinking if you're out in the cold. And that's actually an issue, because colder air has a lower humidity, so you lose a lot more of your body fluids by breathing, and you should really drink enough. My lips were so dry, when I smiled on the next day, they actually broke up and bled. So I was looking a little bit like the mouth of Sauron. and it was not pleasant. So make sure that you drink enough, especially in cold temperatures, because in high temperatures it's more intuitive to drink a lot, right? Okay, so we all knew that melting snow is cumbersome, and one thing we brought were metal cups. Now you can see this one was in the fire, and we made the experience that this doesn't really work well. So what we did is we put a little bit of water in it, then put snow in it, and put it next to the fire. But regardless what we did, we always had ash and a little bit of stuff from the fire going into our cups. So if you want to bring something to melt snow in the fire with actually putting it into the fire and not having a tripod where you just have it dangling above the fire, then bring something that has a lid so that you can protect the water. Because it doesn't sound like much, but if you then pour it into your meal or into coffee and you have the pine needles swimming around, it's just not nice. Um, so that's definitely something to consider. Um, One of our friends had a metal bottle that you could actually um, put into the fire, but it had only a small mouth. So it was not as large as the cup where you can just go through the snow and it's full. But he really had issues with getting enough snow into the bottle, and it was quite cumbersome. I heard that there are, for example, Nalgene bottles out there that are made from steel. Um, that might be a good option, or titanium. But there are also other specialized, yeah, pots and stuff for cooking in the fire. And you might want to bring something like that if you really want to cook in the fire. As I just said, we brought a lot of water, and we tried different containments or containers for the water. People had classic CamelBak, which were in an insulation sleeve, also with insulation for the mouthpiece, for the little hose that comes out. I brought a simple platypus, which you can fill with up to 2.5 liters of water. Other people actually brought insulation flasks, and we tried all that stuff out and checked what worked best. I additionally also had an ordinary plastic Nalgene bottle with me. Now, for the CamelBaks, despite what they say uh, in their commercials, the hose just it froze overnight. I think one of the guys already had ice in the hose um, after the first 6 hours or so. So yes, there is a little bit insulation, and yes, you theoretically have the possibility to blow into the hose, to blow the water back into the bigger compartment so it doesn't stay in the hose. But I would still not necessarily want to rely on that one. Um, with the platypus, I had it just in my backpack on the back side where I have the compartment that is also meant for the CamelBak, and that it stayed liquid also after the first night, so that worked very well. Um, when I had it out and I actually put it in the snow in the morning of the second day, it started freezing up a little bit, but since it is so squeezy and mushy, it was very easy to crumble the ice and really still get the water out of it. So I think that the platypus is something you can recommend, um, but and yeah, it's just a cheap alternative, right? I'm a little bit concerned about the long time use of that one. I mean, I brought that already on a lot of bigger climbs, but not on all of them. So yeah, I will let you know how long this one holds up, but yeah, we will see. For now, they have been really good, and it worked also very well in colder areas. Um, I wish I could say the same for my Nalgene bottle. My Nalgene bottle, which I had in an insulation sleeve on the outside of my backpack. Um, the problem was not so much that the content of the bottle was freezing. that was also a little bit the case, but the lid froze shut. And we had 3 people trying it, and only the fourth really got to open the lid of the Nalgene bottle. And that, even though it is fully made of plastic, so you wouldn't expect that, right? So that was really surprising to me that the Nalgene bottle actually froze shut. Now, for the thermos or insulation bottles, um, of course, they held the water fluid, so it was still liquid, um, but they're super heavy. I mean, that's just the downside. You're just carrying a lot of weight if you bring a thermos bottle. And with water, let's do the transition to food, because this is connected, because we ate freeze-dried meals, just due to the weight, and it worked fairly well. Now, I brought my reactor stove, and I ended up boiling the water for the whole team. So not only for me or my buddy, but really for all the people. I was constantly boiling water for them with this one, because it worked so much better than just boiling water on the fire. Of course, now the gas is a resource that you can't refill if you're out in the woods, right? So you have to bring enough gas, but these stoves are very efficient and I'm a big fan of them. Now, one thing I will do, I will look for a little plastic cup that might be that high, that fits here below the stove, so I can have it with the stove all the time. Because my intention is to start to heat up a little bit of water and then put that in the cup and put the actual gas cartridge into that warm water. Because the biggest issue you have in very cold temperatures is that your gas cartridge will ice up, and then it will lose pressure, and the stove is not running well anymore. What I did now to basically make sure that this doesn't happen, I brought 2 cartridges. I always had one with me inside of my clothes, and the other one was working, and then I just switched them out. But that would have been something good if I would have a little cup or something, a little bowl, that I can just put below that one so that it fits with it, and where I can put the gas cartridge in it. But other than that, this one worked really, really well. I mean, it's, yeah, fantastic. Together with the meals, we get to something that I already mentioned before. Um, if you don't have anything where you can put things, right, except for the snow, then it's really cumbersome even to cook, because you have the stove, right, and you need to hold it, and then you have the freeze-dried meal and pour in the hot water, but you can't really hold on to it because it gets hot, right? So that's something we noticed. We had to basically work in teams to fill our freeze-dried meals. One guy was holding it, the other guy was pouring water in, but the other guy was holding it on top, right? So yeah, again, get something where you can put stuff on it that is not the snow. One from our team just put his freeze-dried meal in the snow, filled it with water, and then you have to let it rest, right? And during the time it rested, it froze up. So yeah, not much used to that freeze-dried meal anymore, right? Because it was not freeze-dried but frozen, and yeah, not a good call. So these were our main takeaways. Maybe it's a little bit of input for you, what to avoid and what really works well if you camp out in winter. I didn't go through all of the gear that I brought, because there is a lot of stuff with knives, etc. But these are the real obvious things, and I guess nobody would do a day or 2 days of survival in the wilderness without bringing a knife. So I assume you will have that. These were really the takeaways where we said, okay, this worked exceptionally well. This didn't work well, and I hope they were helpful for you. If they were helpful for you, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the time you spent here watching this video, and I'll see you next time.